snack. Me and you gonna have a little chat about books. Hi guys, so today I'm here to do a book review, and this book was actually not on my July TBR. I didn't plan to read it, but as soon as I found out about this book, because it's only just been released about a week ago maybe, I had to buy it because it just sounded so cool and different. And also it contains a novella by Brandon Sanderson, so what more reason did I need? So the book that I'm talking about is Shadows Beneath, the Writing Excuses Anthology, and it's an anthology which contains 4 different novellas by 4 different authors. The authors are Brandon Sanderson, of course that's the major reason I bought the book, and he writes Sixth of the Dusk. Dan Wells, who writes I.E. Demon. Howard Tayler, who writes An Honest Death. Mary Robinette Kowal with A Fire in the Heavens. So I had never heard of the other 3 authors really. I've not read anything by them and I don't really recognise their names, so didn't really know much about any of them or what sort of genre they specialised in. But I did obviously know about Sanderson, and it was announced on his blog about this book coming out, so I instantly bought it and started reading. So basically the thing that makes this story quite unique to a lot of other anthologies and a lot of other books with novellas is that this is not just a load of stories thrown together. This book is actually designed by these 4 authors to actually give you an idea of the process that authors go through when they are brainstorming their stories, when they're editing their stories, from the first draft to the final draft, what changes, all that sort of thing. So it's actually a really useful kind of guide for people who want to be aspiring authors and things like that as well. And that was really interesting to me, to kind of get a sneak peek behind the scenes. That sounded really, really cool, which is another major reason that I picked up this book, because it was about £6 on my Kindle, and I would definitely say that it's worth paying that. Each story is quite unique with the style. None of them are sort of the same genre. All of them are quite different and quite interesting in their own way. We have some which are sci-fi, we have some which are kind of military, we have 2 that are quite fantastical. But the thing that they do all share in common is the fact that they are a writing group, and all 4 of them together came together each time that they would talk about their stories, and they would critique one another, and they would help one another out with kind of deciding whether this should be in the story, whether this was unnecessary, etc, etc. And so I really, really loved the premise of this whole book. It just sounded like it was going to be really interesting and very inspiring, and it certainly was. So at the end of the book we have a load of extra added material after the 4 novellas. All of that added material includes things like the first draft of their stories and the brainstorming session, which was the initial idea thought process behind the story and where it was going to go. And then we also have some of the authors' critique sessions, so we see what other people thought of their first draft and how they changed things. We also get to see all the edits that happen, so you see the original draft and then you see a score through all of the words which were taken out and an underline underneath all of the words and phrases that were added in, so you can kind of compare what was there at the start and how that changed and was edited to the end process. That was really, really cool to see, and I really enjoyed that. I must say that I did love the inclusion of the transcribed podcasts where they did do the brainstorming most, because I thought that that was really interesting to kind of get an insight into how the actual authors were as a personality, because of course an author is someone who we don't really tend to see face to face very often. They're not really a celebrity status usually, and so we don't tend to hear too much from them opinions wise and things like that. And so I thought it was a really, really interesting thing to see the thought process behind everything that they did and how they kind of thought about what they were going to include and why they were going to include it, and the messages and the meanings behind everything that they were doing. And I also felt like, because 3 of the stories weren't by Brandon Sanderson, I didn't know if I was going to like them or not, and I actually found that 2 of them were pretty open-ended, to the point where I didn't really like the endings of them. I thought they were too broad, and I didn't think that they went into enough detail about what was happening and felt final enough, so that was a bit disappointing. But then having the transcripts to go over and see why it was left that way and see the deeper meanings behind it and the sort of subconscious plot that's going on, I never would have even thought of that if I hadn't actually had the transcripts at the back. I would never have delved deeper into the meaning of the story because it wasn't as interesting for me as, for example, the fantasy one, which is more interesting to me personally. The inclusions of the added extras was a major part of why I ended up giving this book a 4.5 star rating out of 5, and if it had not included all of that extra content at the back and it was just purely the 4 novellas, I would probably not have enjoyed it anywhere near as much, and it would have got maybe 2.5, 3 stars at most. But because of all that added content, it really solidified a lot of things for me and made it so much more interesting and so much more dynamic to explore the background behind all of these things. And it was just really a new experience, one that I've never even thought of having, just being able to see the behind the scenes of everything, and that was a really lovely, wonderful thing. I would love to see another version of this kind of book being brought out in the future, because I think it's really important to get a look behind the scenes sometimes and really think deeper about what's going on in the story, both in a sort of religious sense and a metaphorical sense, in a sort of atmospheric sense and scientific way. Like everything and anything they covered in these brainstorming sessions. They were really interesting, and they're only short snippets of what's really going on, because of course these are only very short novellas, so there isn't a massive amount of world building and story building that goes into them. But imagine if you took your favourite authors, someone like Peter V. Brett or Patrick Rothfuss or someone like that, and you took their story and you got to see the behind the scenes of how they came up with all of these ideas, all the critiques that they got about their work, what they didn't like and ended up changing, all of these other elements of the world that the author themselves, they know that these things exist, but because we don't see all of the different edits, we don't know that these things exist, we don't know what their raw forms are, and it's just so interesting to get a look behind the scenes and think about why these added bonuses were thrown in and so on. And I loved it, and I definitely would love to see future anthologies where this sort of thing is included, because I think this is really a turning point, and although I'm personally not particularly interested in writing stories currently myself, I don't plan to be an author anytime soon. One day I might want to be, but in the meantime, I love learning about other people and their experiences with becoming a writer and the stories that they create. In the brainstorming session, both Mary and Howard actually gave 3 different ideas for stories that they'd obviously been planning and thinking about beforehand. So they gave a brief synopsis in a paragraph of each of their stories, and then the others all helped them to decide which story they should pursue for this anthology itself. And I loved that because it gave you an insight into these different ideas, and just that one paragraph sparked all of these ideas in my mind about how good that story could have been if we only saw that one too. So there's obviously other stories out there that they're thinking of writing, and I cannot wait to see them one day. Another thing that I do have to mention before I start actually going into the individual novellas themselves is that there are illustrations included before each of the stories. One illustration for each novella. So illustrations, I think they always enhance a novel or a novella or a story, and they just give you a clearer image of everything going on. So I did want to mention that briefly. So now moving on to the actual novellas themselves. The first one that I read was Mary's one, because that was the first one, and that was A Fire in the Heavens. And this story is basically a kind of an adventure story. It's about this woman called Katin. She's got strong religious beliefs about there being a culture on the other side of the world and a landmass on the other side of the world where her people actually originated from. So that is what her religion believes. They believe that they came from the other side of the world. And so she really wants to discover, is this true? Are we able to go back there and kind of colonize it? Are we able to interact with anyone there? Is there even anyone there? No one really knows what lies across the other side of the world. And so she hires a group of sailors to take her to the other side of the world, to the moon, and to see what lies beneath it. And it's a very fun story. Like, I did enjoy the world building. I thought that the description was really intense and lovely and very picturesque, and I thought it was very detailed in a good way. But I felt like the story itself was a little bit undeveloped. Like, once they reach this landmass and they get into all sorts of troubles and so on, I felt like the story just wasn't as entertaining as it could have been, and it didn't really grip my attention as much as I would have liked, which was a shame considering that Sanderson actually recommended her story to any fans of his work, and I didn't find that I loved it as much as I was hoping to. I just kind of thought it was okay, it was decent for a short story, but it just didn't go anywhere and didn't leave me thinking so much into the depths behind it or anything like that. So I ended up giving her one a 3.5 star rating. I did enjoy it. I thought that, as I say, the description was definitely her strongest element, and you really see that in the exercises that they do at the end of the novel as well. You kind of see how she really pictures the world building, and she pictures the ideas of the world more than the actual plot line. And I definitely feel like the plotline suffered a little bit because of the world building, but I do like the world. So yeah, 3.5 for that one. Moving on, I then read I.E. Demon, which is by Dan Wells, and this is a military kind of paranormal sci-fi all rolled into one, and it's the shortest novella in the whole book by quite a lot. It's about 15 pages, I think. Very, very short. It's the story of a military man who is fighting against the Taliban, and he basically is quite low down in the ranks. He's not a high up soldier or anything. He hasn't got any sort of honours or anything like that. And he kind of just gets ordered around by his boss, and his boss basically says, you need to go and test out this new piece of fieldwork machinery, and we need to see if it works. So he doesn't know anything about it. He's not told what it does. He's not really told why he's being sent out there in the middle of the war to go and test this thing. But obviously he has to follow his orders, and so he does go out there, and things go a little bit wrong. And demons start appearing fairly quickly. So it's quite an action-packed story. It's definitely got some comical elements to it, but I just felt like because it was only 15 or so pages, it was so short, there was not enough time to really get attached to any of the characters, and the world building was let down considerably by the fact that it was more action than world building. So this was kind of the opposite of the first story. The first story was really, really good on the world building. This one was really, really good on the action. Together they would have been a good story, but both of them were lacking the other element, which was a little bit of a shame. And I just didn't really connect with this because military books, they're not really my kind of thing. I don't tend to read them very often, and I get a little bit bored by them, regrettably. Like, I know it sounds bad to say, but I just don't find that action books are that interesting to me, and so I didn't really enjoy it, and I ended up only giving it a 1.5 star rating because it just really was too underdeveloped and not really my thing at all. However, although I didn't like the actual story itself, after reading all the transcripts behind and seeing the motivations for the story, I felt like I definitely got a better understanding of the whole process and the whole thing, even though I didn't particularly like the story itself. The next novella was An Honest Death, and that was by Howard Tayler, who I've never heard of, but definitely I was interested in after reading this story, because I actually really enjoyed this, and it came kind of second place out of the novellas for me. Obviously Sanderson's was first place. And I definitely enjoyed it more than Mary's one, actually, because I felt like it was just more entertaining and a better read on the whole. So this story is told from the point of view of a rather witty and cynical bodyguard who works for a CEO at a pharmaceutical company who are developing all sorts of big, new and experimental drugs. He's a very engaging and amusing character. He really has his own little sort of internal dialogue that goes on a lot. We see his thought process behind everything he does, and he kind of assesses every situation that he gets into, like a risk assessment or a threat assessment. So it's quite funny to see the way that he thinks about things and analyses things. However, when Death himself appears in the office of the CEO one day unexplained, he kind of has to rethink his tactics, because now he's not facing some guy coming in and breaking in to steal the drugs. He's actually facing Death himself, and things start to go a little bit paranormal and a little bit sci-fi and crazy, but I definitely enjoyed it, and I felt like it was a really fun ride of a story, and I just wanted to see more from it. I definitely felt like there could have been a longer story there. It could have been much more developed and explained, but I really, really enjoyed and connected with the characters on that one, so that was something I really liked, as opposed to the other characters and the other stories where I didn't connect so much with them. I thought it was a very well written and well conceived idea, and that Tayler is obviously a talented writer, and I ended up giving that one a 3.5 star rating as well, but this one I enjoyed more than the first one, which I also gave 3.5, because it wasn't quite a 4-star story, because it it really needed to be longer to be 4 stars in my opinion. But other than that, I did really enjoy it. Finally, I moved on to the Sanderson novella, which was obviously the main reason I even picked up the book, and so I was really looking forward to that. And I must say that even if you don't like any of the other stories in the anthology, or if you're not interested in any of the extra bonus material, then buying it just for this novella, I think, was 100% worth it. This is the story of Dusk. Dusk is a trapper. Trappers are basically islanders who work and live around these islands, and these islands are all quite deathly and uninhabited, and there's a lot of traps and things that can go wrong on this island. And every trapper, they have to decide once they have finished their training what island they want to actually live on and work on and hunt on and sort of do their bit for. And our main character, Dusk, he decided that he wanted to work on Patji, which is basically the biggest, the daddy of them all, the god who rules over everything. And it's also the most scary out of all of them, with a lot of things that can go very, very wrong. In the world that he's part of, there are these birds that are called Abia, and they have special abilities. They can do all sorts of things, such as get you out of danger by showing you your corpse where you might have died if you weren't paying more close attention, and things like that. So they're really interesting, really, really cool characters. These birds are basically the way that the trappers manage to survive on the islands and navigate them and not die. For a fantastical element, they were so interesting, so cool, and I loved the relationship between Dusk himself and his bird. I thought they were so well connected, and I thought it was really, really interesting. The birds themselves are a rare commodity which can only be found on the main island. No one from outside has ever managed to breed birds on the mainland that could have these special abilities, and so many people are thinking of trying to somehow develop and experiment ways of making that happen. And it's basically a story about the outside threat of these people coming and potentially colonising and taking over and destroying the island itself. As always, I have to say that I loved Sanderson's writing style. I always do, and I thought that for a Cosmere novel this was really, really beautiful, and it's quite short, but it's definitely a lot longer than all of the other novellas combined in the anthology, and I loved it. I thought it was really, really well put together, really well analysed, really well built, and the world itself was just fantastic. The ideas and the way that everything slotted together was just magical, and I didn't expect the ending, so that was always a really good thing in my mind. I gave this one a 4.5 star rating out of 5, and I really, really enjoyed it. Again, it was kind of left on a fairly open ending, but it kind of hinted at more to come, and because it's set in the Cosmere universe, I feel like there may well be another story that is set later on or something to kind of finalise a little bit more about what was going on in that world. And I loved it, and I definitely think it was 100% worth buying the book just for that. On the whole, it was really interesting to see the behind the scenes of Sanderson's work. I thought it was amazing. I loved seeing all the critiques that he got and how he changed things to adapt it to make them better and so on, and all of the other authors as well. And I just think that the idea of this sort of anthology is so wonderful, and definitely would be something that I would have loved to have seen if I was taking a language or literature course in school or college, because it really, really would have been interesting and probably would have inspired me a lot more than some of the other poetry and things like that I read. And I would definitely say that if you are thinking about becoming an author, or if you are in the writing process yourself, then either listening to the podcasts or getting this anthology and reading it really will help you, I think. Even though I'm not a writer, I could see that just from reading it, and I would highly, highly recommend this book to you guys. For a book that I didn't even know was coming out, so it was kind of like a surprise, I really enjoyed it, and I would highly, highly recommend it. I gave it 4.5 stars on the whole, and yeah, I would love to know what you guys thought of this, whether you think you're going to buy it, because I doubt many people have read it yet, or if you have read it, then do let me know what you thought of it, because yeah, I cannot speak more highly of this. I thought it was really, really good, and I thought that the whole idea was wonderful. So if I had an anthology of all of my favourite authors like this, I would be in heaven, and it would be really, really cool. Thank you guys for watching, and I will see you all very soon in my next video. Bye! Me and you gonna have a little